What is going on, YouTube? What is going on, Kansas City? And what is going on, everybody? And welcome to the Beat of KC. Again, we have an amazing guest on, ladies and gentlemen. This is absolutely awesome. Josh Fann on here to talk about Kansas City Chiefs. You know, this is going to be exciting. I got a ton of questions for him. I know he's going to kill it. So we're going to start out with the first one, and that's going to be, Josh, can you tell us a little bit about what you're excited for in this up and coming season?
Man, I gotta say, number one thing I'm excited for is probably what this offense is going to look like now that Patrick Mahomes actually has time to throw. And it's such a cop out answer. Like most people will probably, say, well, if you ask them what they're most excited to see, is probably the new offensive line. But honestly, it would be kind of foolish to pick anything else because I mean, they're loaded at it's amazing the 180 they've done with the outlook of the position in just one off season. And this is kind of off topic, but it really makes you appreciate what you have in the front office and Brett Veach, because even though I'm pretty critical of him sometimes,
Yeah,
and rightfully so, you can't deny the fact that he when he sees a need, he attacks it, and he's very determined. And that's something that's great to have when you see organizations like the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers and what's happened there. It just really makes you thankful for what you have.
most definitely. And you know, that really does transition me very well into the next thing. So obviously we know this more recent draft is right, you know, just happened. I feel like we had a pretty solid draft. That's going to be kind of part B to my question. So part A is, we've kind of seen Brett Veach make some drafts, and to me, it's been a coin flip. There's been some questionable picks. A lot of the ones that it'll immediately raise if they've paid that much attention is the fact that we took Mecole Hardman versus DK Metcalf. That one hurts me every time I talk about it.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on his drafting ability and his style?
Man, he really, like you said, he's really 50-50. But I think the positive thing is he seems to have improved each draft. Like 2018, really bad. I mean, there's no other way around it. It was really bad. 2019, a little bit better. Not a fan of giving up a bunch of assets for Clark now that we know what he is.
Yes.
Mecole, that was a questionable pick. But the draft after that, well, honestly, the 2019 draft was still a little bit it's kind of mad because Colin Saunders, he's another one that a lot of people don't talk about. That was a top 100 pick, and he hasn't really done much yet going into his third year. But the later round picks in that draft are good. They're looking good. 2020, got Lucas Niang. Everyone's pretty excited about him. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, don't really love the value, but he's a good player. And then Willie Gay, of course. And then this year, I mean, we haven't actually seen any of these guys take the field yet, so you have to temper your expectations. But yeah, I really did come out of it thinking like this is one of his better drafts because there was not a single pick. Like I'm pretty sure I mentioned in one of my videos that every single pick he made, I actually had that player mocked to the Chiefs at one point or another. So in my opinion, he had a really good draft. And a lot of guys that I think may not have the highest ceiling, but have a really good floor to where they can like contribute rather immediately.
Yeah, for sure. You know, and that's kind of what is a little bit been frustrating for me as not only a fan, but someone who is starting to cover the Kansas City Chiefs, honestly. But there's also been kind of some question marks from myself that I'm like, you know, was he kind of pushed into some aspects? And what I mean by that is if you look that first year, you know, how much time was really emphasized and put on the draft because, you know, he's still learning to, I guess, become that GM. You know, he kind of was there lurking behind the scenes when we had Dorsey. And then there he is. He's the GM. He's learning everything. And then that next year, obviously, we have all that Tyreek Hill stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I feel like he got a little bit of pressure of like going and getting that receiver and just like, hey, this is our guy. We've been, scouting him. We've looked at him. Let's go ahead and get Mecole, even though DK Metcalf, who is just a monster sitting there. So, you know, sometimes I kind of give him some leniency, but then like you just said too, you see the Kalen Saunders, you see like some of the third round picks that we've taken, the Breland Speaks, like those types of players. And you're like,
and you also have to remember they traded up for Breland Speaks. Yeah. They traded up for Mecole Hardman too. And another thing is AJ Brown was another receiver I like. Yes. He got taken before Mecole. However, I think if the Chiefs were aiming to get AJ Brown, they still could have traded up and gotten AJ Brown too. So I kind of include him when like comparing McColl to some of his other class peers, because
Yes.
I feel like if the Chiefs played that right, they still could have gotten Brown, but they traded up for both of those players. That's
Yes.
another thing you got to remember too.
Yeah, that gosh dang. But that definitely, continues on with the draft. So I did interview Michael Darcy, and I asked him this question, and I have to ask you this question:
Mhm.
What is your favorite pick in this draft, and why?
Man, I got two answers for this. And that's because I'm a huge Mizzou fan. I love Nick Bolton. So that's like my favorite pick, because I actually got a poster. It's right above this Battlehawks one right here. You can't see it, but it's a Mizzou one. And I had it signed by Nick Bolton at the Mizzou spring game. And I told him that I hope he gets drafted to the Chiefs. So when that happened, I mean, that was my favorite pick. But talking about just like my favorite pick, where it's like, man, I really think this guy can be something. It is probably, I Man, honestly, I could have three answers to this. I'm kind of torn between Cornell Powell and Noah Gray, those later round picks. Because
Yeah.
Noah Gray, I mocked him very early to the Chiefs. He's someone that is not, look, I mean, Brett Veach even said, like, it's tough to compare a guy to Travis Kelce. And I said, in my mock draft way back when, that this guy's really similar to Travis Kelce. He runs really smooth routes. He's got
Yes.
good hands.
Yes.
Will he ever be a Travis Kelce? Will he ever be a top 5 tight end? Probably not, but he's someone that can replicate what Travis Kelce can do to the point where you're comfortable having him on the field. And let's face reality. Kelce's getting up there in age. So having someone that can actually give Kelce a breather for once, that would be a really good pick if Noah Gray is who everyone thinks he is.
Yeah, for sure, man. And that's where it was tough for me, because I like the tight end position a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And when they took Noah Gray, you know, I immediately had to do a video. And if you go back and look, that was my first video I did covering the draft, because of how exciting that pick was, because I really do think he has great hands. His route running ability is, to me, it is really good for him not doing that as much. I don't feel when he was at Duke. I don't think he was asked to do a lot of that.
No, he wasn't.
And so I think for him to be able to do that, and then really translate that to the NFL, because he is going to be learning from Travis Kelce like that.
Yep.
He's going to be poking at him all the time, asking
That's
questions.
an underrated aspect of that pick too.
Yes. And I think their size really is very similar. I think Travis Kelce's 6'4", and Noah Gray's 6'3". They're about the same weight. So I just think that it's going to be a phenomenal thing to see on the field. It was tough for me because I do like Trey Smith a lot too. And I think he could definitely be something special. And I think if he continues to carry that grittiness and like his play through the whistle type mentality, even in the NFL, that's going to be amazing for him. But yeah, it was tough for me. Like I definitely like this draft so far. So that kind of also leads me to a question. So I'm a big time, actually I'm trying to think of Pat McAfee. So I watch Pat McAfee all the time. And today, they were talking about Julio Jones, which we're going to talk about, but this is more related to the draft. And they were talking about how they would much rather give up draft picks. And in the current situation, we've kind of seen some sneaky things, or revealed draft picks potentially that will acquire Julio Jones. They were like, hey, we're all for it. If they want to take the next 3 seconds and whatever, we'll give up that to get Julio Jones, who is an all-pro receiver, who is a Pro Bowl, receiver. What are your thoughts really about, I guess, how draft picks are valued for teams? Because I kind of was divided on this. I can understand how draft picks can be valued because of salary, because you can't pay everyone $15 million. But then I also see where they're talking about what the asset you're getting when it comes to a Julio Jones. So I know this kind of could be a little tough, but how would you say you value draft picks and in this situation, you know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of moving parts to that, answering that question. So one of them is, where you're at as a franchise, and you're the Chiefs, so you're a Super Bowl contender. And with that being said, Julio Jones would almost guarantee a Super Bowl if you traded for him. So obviously it's something to think about. Yeah, those draft picks might be valuable because you need cheap labor and you got a lot of guys to pay. But, it depends on what you prefer. Would you prefer like longevity with your picks, like being able to extend your window by being able to use those draft picks to add more talent? Or would you rather, like I said, almost guarantee a Super Bowl right now? And then there's also the part where draft picks, like you said, they're unknown commodities and you'd be trading them for the known commodity. Well, it depends on what happens with those picks, because if those picks hit with the team that you traded them to and the player that you traded for ends up not working out, well, then fans are going to rip the GM. They're going to be
Yeah.
like, man, that was a horrible trade. Brad Veach, he was terrible. But if the picks, if you kept the picks, all right, and then Julio Jones, goes up and has a career year with his new team, and then the picks you have end up not working out, well, then everyone's, they're going to say you're terrible too. So it really just depends on what happens with the picks. Cause we have a recent example in Frank Clark. We gave up a lot of assets to get Frank Clark, who was the known commodity, and we did win the Super Bowl with him, but look at his performance, it's
Correct.
not that great. So it's just, there's so many moving parts to that question that it's really tough to answer. Like, it's not just a straight yes or no.
Yeah.
But I guess you were going to ask me, what I think of the Julio Jones thing. So before answering that, I guess I'll let you officially ask it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I mean, that's where I was torn too. And I completely understand what you're saying because, it's just a tough, those guys played the NFL and they understand from within what a Julio Jones means to an organization. And every time I've done 2 videos on Julio Jones now,
Yeah.
and each one I hit, you're acquiring, if you just set aside the football stats aspect, you're acquiring a leader, you're acquiring someone who has been through it and has done it and accomplished it. And I think that just speaks volumes to what he can contribute to a Powell and some of these like Byron Pringle and
Yeah.
even a Tyreek Hill, because I'm sure Tyreek Hill looked up to a Julio Jones.
Oh, yeah.
And so, that's where I think it is much bigger and why I even am pushing for this trade, because don't get me wrong, like I understand 100% the $15 million in guaranteed money and 2 million the year following. I get that he is 32 years old, and I'm kind of on the fence where people are like he's injured. I think some people view that as more of a fantasy aspect where like I get the idea of people saying like he's been injured a lot. And
See,
so
yeah,
go
I'll cut
ahead.
you off right there.
No, go
No,
ahead.
this is an annoying thing. See, like, I know most, YouTubers and writers and stuff like that, they're never going to attack the fans. Me, I will attack the fans. I'm not afraid. Chiefs fans, they like to do this thing where if there's a player that the Chiefs want to acquire, if they have even the slightest injury history, people like to call them injury prone, never healthy. If you look at Julio Jones's games missed, it's really not that bad. Yes, he's been on the injury report with injuries, but he's still played and he's still been productive even with those injuries. And look, there's guys all the time that aren't on the injury report that have been playing through injuries. I think even Jeff Allen, the former Chiefs offensive lineman, tweeted recently, there's so many guys that get off-season surgeries and stuff
Yeah.
for injuries that you never hear about. I'm sure, there's plenty of Chiefs that we haven't heard about that had some kind of operation for an injury this past offseason that you didn't even know were hurt. So Julio Jones, I really don't think this whole that he's injury prone too old. It's just people trying to use that in favor of their argument, really is all
Yeah.
it is, I think, because Julio Jones, he last year was really his only like really bad season as far as missing games, and he still averaged nearly 100 receiving yards per game. So he's been super productive. And another thing that I mentioned, because I made a Todd Gurley video yesterday, and Todd Gurley is
Yep.
another player that has had injury issues. I talked about it, a really underrated aspect when talking about players and their injuries and stuff coming to KC is Kansas City has one of the best athletic training staffs in all the NFL. And that's really worth noting. Rick Burkholder is
Yes.
widely regarded as one of the best athletic trainers in the world.
Correct. Yeah, 100%. And that's, I hit on that when we drafted Trey Smith immediately.
Yeah.
He's coming to possibly the best, medical teams in the entire NFL. So when it comes to evaluating him and keeping him healthy, most definitely. So yeah, I agree 100% with that. And like his injuries, if he is injured, haven't been that serious enough to where it's been like just something insane. It's been like maybe a hamstring or something.
Yeah.
But while I have this on my mind, I do have to laugh because I did see your Todd Gurley video.
Yeah.
And I saw something on Twitter today that said the only reason why he's going to potentially Detroit is because they're giving out kneecaps up there. So I had to laugh at that. But yeah, that leads me definitely to the next piece, which is the Julio Jones. I know a lot of people have covered it and talked about it. Is this something that after really kind of evaluating, you would still consider doing? And what would you give up to get him?
I'd absolutely consider it. I think if you aren't considering it or you pretend like it's a bad idea, you're just kind of looking for reasons for not wanting it to happen. Because, I mean, if you get Julio Jones, this is the best offense ever assembled on
Yes.
paper. And also, we mentioned the injuries and stuff too. A lot of that, might be because Julio Jones has been one of the primary sources of offense in Atlanta for so long. If he's coming here, the load is going to be a lot less on him, which would maybe improve his health on the field. So that's something to think about too. But the most I'd be willing to give up is probably like a couple top 100 picks, not being a first round pick. I wouldn't give up a first round pick for him. I don't think. Well, actually, you know what? It really depends. I would love something. I think I saw this on the Twitter timeline. I would be willing to give up a first round pick if it's one of those things, kind of like in the Baltimore Ravens deal for Orlando Brown. They gave up the first round pick, but they got a second back from the
Yeah.
Ravens. So really, they're just downgrading a pick in order to acquire the player. And
Yeah.
then maybe you swap some like fifths and sixths and stuff like that just to give them some extra compensation. So yeah, I mean, I'd be willing to give up maybe like a first if they're willing to give back one of their seconds or maybe a third or something like that where it's just a fair swap for both sides and you get Julio Jones, of course.
Yeah. And I definitely, like I said, I've done two videos, and the second one really kind of opened my eyes again to, like, I want this to happen. And I know anytime a big player's name pops up, immediately Kansas City Chiefs fans are like, we got to get this done.
Yeah.
I think this is a completely different situation because you're talking about one of the best receivers to play that position. I mean, you really are. You hear it all the time. NFL players are talking about it. They're like, Julio Jones is the best player. One of the best things you see floating around there is when Kyler Murray is a rookie. Larry Fitzgerald is talking to Kyler Murray, and he's just like, that guy's a beast. Like, he's the best I've ever seen. And that's coming from Larry Fitzgerald. So
Right.
you know what you're going to get when you get Julio Jones. And like you even said, on paper, this is by far the best offense you would see on paper. And I would have to
Yeah.
agree. And it just is so much depth. And I think that's what the Chiefs have been able to accomplish this year, is just really creating depth in so many different avenues.
Yep.
And that's what I think is going to help propel them to get to the Super Bowl again, as crazy as that sounds, just because if one person goes down, they're going to be able to slot somebody right back in there that has that
Yep.
experience. And it's just, yeah, man. So I'm all for the Julio Jones trade, and super, super excited. So,
Yep.
that kind of leads me to the opposite side of the football and the defense.
Yep.
We're going to talk about the salary cap here in a little bit, but the Honey Badger, obviously, he goes to Twitter, and I know you commented on it, and got that going. And he said something on your tweet, didn't he?
Yeah, I was the person that he replied to with his
Yeah.
tweet that went viral about not getting the extension.
That's awesome, man. And he's actually my favorite Kansas City Chiefs player when he was drafted the
Yeah,
Cardinals.
he's mine too. I have his jersey, and I don't buy jerseys a lot.
Yeah, that hurt my heart when he went to the Cardinals, because even out of college, it's like, please come to Kansas City.
Yeah.
You know, I hope this deal gets done. I think he's definitely earned it. He's a 3-time first team All Pro. He's multiple time, Pro Bowler. I'd much rather look at those first team All Pros. But I think this deal definitely needs to get done. What are your thoughts? And if you had to guess what he could potentially get, what are you thinking?
That's a good question. I have no idea what the market looks like for him right now, and I think
Yeah.
that's a big reason why we haven't gotten an extension yet is because they're either really far apart, or maybe it's just because they really haven't gotten into big discussions yet. But I think it will happen. Like, like the day the tweet came out, I saw a lot of freaking out on the Twitter timeline, like, oh my God, if the Chiefs don't extend Tyrann Mathieu, I don't know what we're gonna do. Brett Veach is not stupid. Again, I've criticized him a lot. He's not stupid. He's not gonna let someone who's been an All-Pro every season he's been in Kansas City walk for absolutely nothing. Tyrann wants to be in KC. KC wants him here. They're not going to let him walk. And Tyrann, when I made a video the day that happened, clearing the air, and I'm like, this is what he does. I love the dude, but he goes on Twitter and he says a lot of stuff, and he ends up deleting like half of it. And he even said that in his like press conference media availability today. I delete a lot of my tweets. He knows he says some dumb stuff sometimes, but that's just who he is. He likes to get into it with fans and stuff, which is, fine. But yeah, it was crazy the day I actually got that tweet, because I tweeted the day prior to actually getting a response, when are we going to get an extension? And he must have tweeted it like really late at night, because I just remember I wake up and I check my phone and I saw I have a reply from Tyrann Mathieu, but I like clicked on it to go see it, and it was like, this tweet's not loading. But luckily someone else screenshotted it and posted it, and there was a bunch of freak out. But yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the Chiefs are going to re-sign Tyrann Mathieu. To be honest, though, about what type of deal he could get, I have no idea. Hopefully they keep him at an annual number that's similar to what he's at now, maybe not too much higher. He'll probably get maybe a little bit of a pay increase, and he'll probably fight for that because he is getting older and he wants that guaranteed money.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'll have to see.
My thoughts was I went 4-5 and I said 70 to 78. And I think you're going to lean a lot more on the guaranteed side, like you said, because he's getting older. And I think if they have discussed had that discussion, I think you do see some of his tweets based on some of these discussions. And I think when it comes to the guaranteed aspect, that's where they're probably a little bit further away, that, in just my opinion. And I think that, he's probably satisfied with the years. He wants to stay in Kansas City, like you said. I think it's that guaranteed aspect that he's really shooting for. So, maybe once, training camp comes, he starts to see the fans, the hype comes, maybe he'll change his stance, but we'll have to see. I'm super pumped. I think that he does a lot. I think he really helped Dan Sorensen become what Dan Sorensen has become as of late. I think he's helped a lot of other players. I think, Breland has talked about how he's helped him, and Breland's talked about, or the Honey Badgers talked about how Breland's helped him. So I really think that there's some aspects that, the Honey Badger provides a ton. So,
and real quick before you move on, I just wanted to throw in the guaranteed money part. I think that's a lot that's part of the reason for the hookup right now. Because when Tyrann tweeted that he's probably not getting an extension, that was fabricated, obviously, but I'm sure there was reason behind the tweet that, they're a little far apart on negotiations. There was some weight to that tweet being true, but the Chiefs also have reason to not maybe give him the guaranteed money that he wants, because look what happened to Eric Berry. He wanted to get extended and stay in Kansas City. He was around the same age when the Chiefs extended him, and that completely fell apart. Heck, I think Eric Berry was still on the payroll up until last year. So that's something that they want to avoid. But yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there.
No, yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think too, and this might sound crazy, but we saw what happened to Justin Houston, and not that turned out to be bad afterwards, because he's killed it the last 2 years, but obviously we saw that Justin Houston, he signs a massive contract, and then it is hurt for the Kansas City Chiefs. Frank Clark signs a massive deal and has not lived up to that contract. You and I both agree to that, and tons of people will agree with that. So I can understand Veach's hesitation, because he does understand, what is going to happen. We're going to talk salary cap here in a little bit, but man, that I completely understand the take on that. And I think that's honestly the hookup is what's going on with that. So, so the next one that I really want to talk about is the defensive end position, or even the defensive line. So I'm super excited about it. I think that the Jarran Reed, is very underrated. Most people still don't even know who he is or what he's able to provide a defense. A lot of people still don't understand that Frank Clark had his career year lined up next to Jarran Reed. And then that also kicks out, it kicks out some of the aspect of what are we going to do there at the D tackle position with Chris Jones and Derek Nottie, and some questions like that, Kalen Saunders even, and some other players. So what do you think about this defensive end position, and really the defensive tackle position?
I'll start with the defensive tackle position. It's absolutely loaded. I don't think there's any denying that. Chris Jones and Jarran Reed as your top two. That's a great position to be in. Still got Derek Nottie. You got Tershawn Morton, who topped out a little bit at the end of last year, but showed potential. Colin Saunders is the one I'm worried about. I don't even know if he makes this roster, because the Chiefs, they had the same amount of defensive tackles last year, and Colin Saunders was inactive for every single week. So that'll be something to watch. Defensive end, though, is where it gets tricky. Frank Clark, I've talked about him over and over again. And it's funny because from day one, I hated the trade. From day one, I hated that trade. And I ended up being right. And it's funny because a lot of Chiefs fans have slowly started to come over to my side to now where, because like before I felt like this is the scale. This was Chiefs fans and I was right here with Frank Clark. Now it's like that. Now everyone's on my side, but Frank Clark, it's frustrating, but we've said it over and over again. Like I said, I've talked about it 1,000 times, but the truth is he's not going anywhere. They can't do anything with him. He can't get traded. He can't get cut. There's just no way.
Yeah.
So the least you can do is help him. Well, they addressed defensive end in the draft with Joshua Kando,
Yeah.
who I like the pick, but it's purely based on upside. So there's a chance he could bust. There's obviously a chance. Taco Charlton, I liked the flashes that he showed last year. Someone that could be a rotational defensive end, a starter. Not quite sure about that.
Yeah.
Another thing you have to consider with Taco, he's never played a full 16 games since he's been in the league. So that's something you got to consider too. And then Mike Dana, he was solid last year for a 5th-round pick, but still someone that can be a starter. Not so sure about that. So I feel like they just need that one more guy on the edge position to give them pass rush specifically. Kando, Taco, and Dana are guys that have some edge setting potential, but are any of them, that speed rush you want on 3rd down? I don't think so. That's why I would still love for them to maybe sign a Melvin Ingram or maybe a Justin Houston, because like Justin Houston, he's someone that's had comparable stats to Frank Clark.
Yep.
So if you're someone that likes Frank Clark, well, what if I told you could have another Frank Clark on the other side of the line, but just for a lot cheaper? Well, then, that sounds pretty good, right? So I would love for one of those signings that happens. The edge position is what I'm worried about, really, because I'm not sure where they're going to get pressure from outside of Frank Clark. And the Jerron Reed signing, we talked about it. It's great.
Yeah.
Him and Clark had their career seasons together. However, what the Jerron Reed signing doesn't do that has to change on its own is Frank Clark beating his guy one-on-one, because that's something he's struggled mightily to do the past 2 seasons. In fact, there's these charts. I brought them up in my video about Frank Clark that Seth Welder from ESPN makes. And basically what it is it shows how often a defensive end is double teamed, and it shows their pass rush winning rate. Tano Passanio was double teamed more than Frank Clark in 2020. And to me, that just tells you how much offenses take him seriously. And that's another reason that Chris Jones was, his sack numbers were way down. A lot of people, I saw them start to turn on Chris Jones saying, why isn't he getting the sacks? Do you guys realize how much Chris Jones is double teamed?
Yes.
And that's another reason why the Jerron Reed signing is great too, because teams can't just double team Jones, because, well, then you have Reed to worry about, who's a great pass rusher himself.
Yeah, for sure. And that I joke all the time, and I think it's more and more serious about it, because I feel Frank Clark has one move, and that's the bull rush. Like, you don't really see the versatility. Like, if you watch the Khalil Mack, he has that I'm going to blow you away type of like off the line stuff, but he's also very handsy, and it's similar to a Von Miller. I mean, we see these guys in our division. So, to see Frank Clark, and my joke is that he always gets pushed so far out of the play.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. He it's not even a bull rush anymore. All it is he tries to run around the tackle as fast as he can.
Yeah, and then he's so far out of the play that the tackle's like, all right, well, whatever. And then he just comes out of nowhere, and you see him, address the play. And I think that's what's most frustrating, but I do like the fact that they did bring in Jerron Reed, that I think it'll help with that aspect. And but I do agree solely on that he has to learn to beat that guy. But that also leads to, we talked about Justin Houston. We talked about the fact that Melvin Ingram could potentially be an option. He didn't sign with the Dolphins after that visit. Yeah. But now I'm hearing that they're kicking Chris Jones out to the DN position as well. What are your thoughts on that? Because we've seen success from the D tackle position. We've seen his epic year, where he had put up some big time sacks, kind of bouncing in and out. What are your thoughts on that? Because I almost would rather him stick at the D tackle position, line up next to Jerron Reed, float him in and out with Derek Nottie to keep those two fresh, because we do know Chris Jones has gotten hurt. But what are your thoughts on him kicking out and playing D end?
So I agree 100%. I would love for him to stick in the middle as much as possible, because that's where he's most disruptive.
Yes.
But that being said, their edge position is so thin that putting Chris Jones at the end is not a bad idea, because he's, he can move really well for a defensive tackle. And also you can maximize his run defense by putting him out at the edge position because of his ability to shed blocks. In fact, back in 2019 when their run defense was, well, their run defense still has some ways to go, but it was like really bad back in that first half of 2019. Well, they ended up playing Chris Jones at defensive end against the Vikings out of necessity because they were really thin on the defensive line. And Dalvin Cook was the leading rusher in the NFL heading into that game, and everyone was like, oh man, this run defense, Dalvin Cook, they're going to have no answer for him. They put Chris Jones out on the edge for that game, and he stopped a lot of Dalvin Cook's runs because of his ability to shed the block
Yeah,
and make a tackle on the ball carrier. And that's something that I think has to be considered because not only do the Chiefs need pass rush from the outside, but they also, need that edge setting ability. So teams don't just run it to the same side every single time, just getting a free 5-6 yards.
yeah.
So maximizing Chris Jones's run defense on the edge is definitely appealing, but I would like to see him still play the majority of his snaps on the inside because that's where he's most disruptive.
For sure. And that leads me right to the next piece, because I think that really helps understand kind of this next piece. So I put out that I feel the cornerback position has a ton of depth. I really do like what we're seeing in the secondary. And, I did receive some pushback on that in the comment section, which I'm okay with. But they're saying, like, Travarius Ward is suspect. He does get injured.
Yep.
Obviously, we know he played with a club half the time last year with his broken hand. Snead broke his collarbone. So Baker obviously had that just terrible, terrible injury. But I think when and then we know Mike Hughes, we traded for Mike Hughes. All these guys have been injury prone, but we understand what this secondary is capable of. I mean, you're talking about Baker, who was a first round pick, Hughes, who was a first round pick. L'Jarius Sneed was just incredible. We know that Ward can do some things. I really do like this secondary position, and how this transition from that D end is. We kind of said that it's a little bit weak. The depth isn't as flashy as it could be, I guess. What are your thoughts on the cornerback position, and do you feel you like the depth we have, or do you think we need to add that Rashad Breeland or maybe somebody else?
So I will say I do think they need to add a Bashad Breeland or
Okay.
someone like that because, I mean, like you said, the cornerback group, it looks really good when you look at the depth, but that's if everyone reaches their full potential. They got DeAndre Baker, they got Mike Hughes, they got Travarius Ward, but those are all guys that have gotten hurt, all guys who their lows have been really low. Rashad Fenton, he is what he is, a solid slot corner. And then L'Jarius Sneed, he's really good, probably the unquestioned number one cornerback, which I'm totally fine with. However, he did have a broken collarbone and a concussion last year. If he goes down, do you really want that as your cornerback situation? Because it's definitely possible that L'Jarius Sneed goes down again, and then your number one is Charvarius Ward.
Yeah.
Charvarius Ward, we've seen, how bad it can get with him when he's having a bad game, like the first Raiders game, for example. I mean, Ruggs just kept beating him over and over and over again. So I definitely still think they need that one veteran guy to put in there because it's one of those positions that if someone were to go down, then they're kind of in trouble. But if everyone does reach their full potential, like Mike Hughes, like DeAndre Baker, guys like that, well, then they're looking really good. But it's just there's so many question marks that I just think they need that, what he is guy, which would be Bashad Breeland.
Yeah. And I agree with that statement too. I would like to see them sign Breeland again, but I can see why they haven't done it quite just yet, because you do have, I think they want to see what Bo Peep Keys is able to provide.
Yeah.
I think there's some of these, undrafted players that are coming into camp that they want to see what they're capable of doing. And so I think that's probably kind of why they haven't pulled that yet. I think if I had to guess, I think he is waiting on the Chiefs because he obviously had a chance with the Vikings potentially. The Bears seem to be interested in him, and he has not quite done it yet. Whether it is the contract aspect because he wants more time or more years, but it's something I think is holding him up. That I think he wants to come back to Kansas City, and he's just and I think that's honestly why he started voicing his opinion. Honestly, I could be wrong, but that's just my thoughts. But I do really like that. I like that thought, and I would like for them to go get a Bashad Breeland. So that kind of also leads me to the next piece. If let's say we don't get Breeland, but we want to get another veteran corner, is there any corners out there? Because again, we see the flashiness and people are like, go get this guy. I've seen a lot of people want to go get a Richard Sherman. You know, if we don't get a Bashad Breeland, is there a veteran cornerback that you kind of are eyeing that you like?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at who's actually still available because sometimes I kind of
Yeah.
forget. Brian Poole is one of them, though, that comes
Yes.
to mind. Very solid corner. Honestly, surprised he's still a free agent. I
Yes.
think it's an injury concern with him right now because he had a shoulder injury that knocked him out like halfway through 2020. But he was one of the most underrated corners in the league last year. And look, this next suggestion I have, Chiefs fans are going to hate it, but if the bridge isn't burnt, Steven Nelson really isn't that bad. I know the way he went out from KC was ugly, but a lot of it was just, fans' emotions running high because
Yeah.
Breland said some stuff on the way out that they didn't like. I get that. But we can give Steven Nelson one thing. Bob Sutton was a terrible defensive coordinator, and that's a really tough situation to be in when you're one of the only good cornerbacks in the Bob Sutton defense. But I actually wrote an article and it was like comparing Steven Nelson and Bashad Breeland's stats. Steven Nelson's actually been arguably better than Bashad Breeland. They've actually had similar production, but when you look at the penalties and how much less penalties Steven Nelson commits than Bashad Breeland, it's you'd almost rather have Steven Nelson
Yeah.
because Steven Nelson is a solid zone corner, and he's someone that, like I said, if the bridge isn't burnt and the Chiefs give him a call, I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah. And that's kind of something from a Chiefs perspective, at least last year, I noticed this, and I mentioned this in Michael's interview too. I need to go back and look if Spags ran a lot of nickel when he was with the Giants, because last year it felt like we ran a ton of nickel. Like we had maybe two, linebackers out there. A lot of times it was Hitchens and Wilson. And so that, going back, you're going to have obviously your multiple corners out there, maybe an extra safety, depending on what they want to do. That's where Sorensen kind of filled in at times and all kinds of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see, because I feel like we have a lot of aggressive, Fenton's very aggressive. Mike Hughes is very aggressive. Definitely. You have a lot of aggressive corners. So it'll be interesting to see how much help they expect to be happening from the back end, because, the Honey Badger's always down in the box, and Dan Sorensen's usually, covering a tight end or down in the box. So, what are your thoughts on at least that aspect? Like, do you feel like we're okay in because that kind of frustrates me a little bit. Like, I would like to see us put a little bit more emphasis on the linebacker position and get them out there and maybe reduce down on nickel. Like, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really just depends on the matchups and stuff like that. Because, I mean, like you said, Spags, he runs a lot of nickel now. And that's another reason why Steven Nelson might be somewhere to go. Because, like, when Bob Sutton was here, he kept putting Steven Nelson in man coverage. Steven Nelson is not a man corner. He's not going to go man to man with Mike Williams of the Chargers and do well. I mean, that's just not his thing. But more 3 safety sets could definitely help. Sorensen, I would like to see them upgrade the 3rd safety spot from Dan Sorensen if they were to do that. But a signing they made, Will Parks, that a lot of people aren't talking about, though, safety, he's someone that can fill in that role right there and compete with Dan and push him. So it really just depends on the matchups too. But we'll have to see.
For sure, man. So that's awesome. I know you talked about Nick Bolton and you're a big Missouri guy, and I look forward to him really taking on his role. And I think his role this year, and you've probably watched him a lot more than I have because I'm a KU fan. But do you think he'll get that opportunity? Do you think they'll treat him more like a Willie Gay?
Well, it'll be interesting because to me, he's a middle linebacker, but Andy Reid said when they drafted him that they think he can play all 3 spots.
Yeah.
He's definitely not as athletic as a Willie Gay. However, he's way more advanced than Willie Gay when it comes to knowing what's going to happen on the field. I mean, he's the one that had the green dot on his helmet at Missouri. He's going to get the green dot after Anthony Hitchens leaves KC. He can call a defense. He knows where to be. And that's part of the reason why I'm not too concerned about his coverage ability. I know a lot of people didn't love the potential in coverage, but he still led the class in passes defended over the past 2 seasons, and PFF was pretty generous in their coverage grade of Nick Bolton. And, you can't just take PFF at face value all the time, but it's still worth something. It is a metric. And Nick Bolton graded out really well in coverage according to them. So I think he will be better in coverage than people give him credit for. And I know his testing numbers aren't the best. He's not a combine warrior, but he's someone that when he puts on the pads, it just really doesn't matter because he's just a good football player. He's smart. He knows where to be. And that's why I don't think fans should be too concerned about it, because he just knows where to be. And also, really, having Nick Bolton, what he does is he gives you another good linebacker that can roam the middle of the field with Willie Gay in the
Yeah.
future. And maybe you can not have that third linebacker and just play another safety, or
Yep.
just play another defensive back.
And that I think that's something that they took into consideration, and that's why I really wanted to go look, and I need to, because
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering if that's why they took that position so seriously, especially him, because they are going to continue to run a lot of nickel, and his ability to do that moving forward. Plus, we understand Anthony Hitchens could be, a money factor next year, and we
Yeah.
may not have him. So it'll be interesting to see. And I'm completely happy with, with Nick Bolton. And in this draft, I don't feel that we had such a glaring need. I was, when they took Nick Bolton, I was kind of upset initially because I really, really wanted Perkins from Oklahoma,
Yeah.
that D end.
Who's a good player? I like him. He's actually, I don't know if you knew, he's from St. Louis. Mizzou recruited him a lot. His brother went to Mizzou. So yeah, I like Perkins a lot too.
Yeah, I wanted him. A lot of people wanted Marshall from, LSU.
Yeah.
But I was all about Perkins. And then, after kind of setting back and seeing Nick Bolton, I was like, I'm okay with this, because we really just didn't have that glaring need
Mm-hmm.
that I felt we needed. So I think that's also probably why we did so well in the draft, just because they could draft on players that they were just super, super confident in. And one thing that I've really noticed too is this year we really drafted based on the Senior Bowl. It feels like every player we took, I'd have to look 100%, but I'm
Mm-hmm.
almost 90% sure that we took every player that attended the Senior Bowl this year. So I think that was kind of something unique as well. I know
Yeah.
when they did the Chief special where they break down and they kind of show you behind the scenes. I know Brett Veach really likes the Senior Bowl a lot. So,
Yeah.
all right, we'll step away from the players and we'll kind of start to wrap this up. The final stuff I'm going to talk about is the schedule. I did a video covering the schedule, and I did one that, from a fan perspective, just a fan, like you're excited about. Which game are you most excited for as a fan? Like, you get to see some players that you're just
Mm-hmm.
excited about. Which one are you excited about for as a fan?
Man, that's a tough question. And honestly, you might have to give me a chance to go back and look at the schedule for me to give. I might have a different answer if I were to go do that. But just off the top of my head, probably the Ravens game, just because
Okay.
the Ravens fan base is one that's annoying me a lot over the past few years. And they're kind of like that annoying little brother that loves to
Yes.
play fight, and you just keep knocking them down over and over, but they won't quit. And I hope this is the time where they just knock them down one more time for good and they don't come back.
I got you, man. I got it, because I really started in heavy when Mahomes and him were going after the MVP, and Lamar won it 2 years ago,
Yeah.
and I was just like, man, that should have been Mahomes, and I just got ate up, and I'm like, this is by far the most controversial fan base I feel like there is. So the next one so I'll kind of give you mine. I had to split it in half. I'm really excited for the Bengals. From a fan perspective, to being able to see Joe Burrows play the Kansas City Chiefs. You got T. Higgins out there. They go and get Jamar Chase.
Yeah.
And they, obviously have Tyler Boyd, Joe Mixon in the backfield. I think that offense could potentially be something special. And I think, just as a fan, I'm excited for that. But I'm also super excited about the Eagles game. And the reason is because, from a fan perspective, I really like Jalen Hurts. They go out and assist him by getting Devonta Smith. And they got Jalen Reagor, Zach Ertz, Dallas Goedert. So, again, another potential good-looking offense. So I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Now
Also,
that,
I think, not to cut you off,
yeah, go
but
ahead.
I believe that's going to be Andy Reid's first game back in Philly since he departed, if I'm not wrong.
Well, that'll be even better, because I think it'll be awesome. I'm sure he'll get an ovation and maybe some appreciation for sure. But maybe they won't. Maybe they boo him for sending Doug Peterson that way. So
Well, I mean, they have a lot of things to thank him for, because he gave him Doug Peterson, and he also, I've talked about this a lot. People don't really talk about it, but he gave them Nick Foles, because
Mhm.
when Andy Reid called
Yep.
Nick Foles said that if it wasn't for Reid calling him to come be that backup for Alex Smith that one year, that he would have retired.
Yeah, for sure. And that's what won him the Super Bowl. So
Yep.
yeah, okay, yeah, for sure. So this next one is, I kind of had to assess it too. So which one do you think will be, I guess, the most prime time? And my two picks were, I think, the Bills, and how I assess this is who I think will view it outside of the two fan bases. So I initially picked the Bills because I just think that's a return of the AFC Championship.
Yep.
And I hopefully everything's healthy and you get to see that full on head to head matchup. I picked the Packers as one, but the way this Aaron Rodgers thing is going, I don't see that being as potentially as hyped up as it could be. I just don't see me personally. I don't think Rodgers goes back. So if you had to pick a game, which one do you think is going to be the most, I guess, impactful?
Probably either Bills because of the reasons you stated, and the Bills fan base didn't really take that loss too well, or the Bills really. I mean, there were fights all over the field at the end of that game, so that's kind of becoming a rivalry.
Yeah,
Or the Cleveland Browns, which that one
yeah,
will be tough to evaluate because it's going to be week one, early in the season. Both teams could look completely different by the end of the year. However, I thought the Browns had a really good offseason
yes,
and they really loaded up on defense. They made some really good signings. John Johnson, that was one that they made. They had a really good offseason. I think they actually did more than the Buffalo Bills to close the gap with
yeah.
Kansas City. So that'll be a tough matchup, I believe.
For sure. And I said that I think that's going to be the most. I'll have to go back and look. I did pick three of them. I did like a fan base, most impactful, and
Right.
maybe the most meaningful. And I think the meaningful one I picked was the Browns because I think that's a very very tough opponent week one. I think that they provide
Absolutely.
such a challenge week one. Like they could have gave us like the Washington football team or somebody like that just to warm up, but they gave us the Cleveland Browns. So I'm definitely looking forward to that. And it's going to be a packed Arrowhead. Hopefully, fingers crossed. It's rocking. And so to kind of wrap this completely up, is there any game that, since you're a St. Louis guy, do you drive up ever to attend a Chiefs game? Do you go to Arrowhead at all, or?
Yeah, no, and I'm actually planning on going with a couple of friends to the Bills game next season, so that'll be
Nice,
a fun one. And I also went to the Mahomes 50th touchdown game against the Raiders a couple years back, so that was a fun one.
nice.
But honestly, the Bills one obviously would be one that I'm excited for this year since I'm most likely going to see it.
That's awesome, man. Yeah. Well, I tell you what, man, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to do this. Hopefully we can continue to do this in the future because this has been a complete blast.
Yeah.
I love just having these conversations and be able to show people like, these perspectives and different thoughts and things like that. So Josh, man, I really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And this was a lot of fun. I definitely look forward to doing another one of these.
Awesome, man. You guys, you guys know exactly how I do it. And I appreciate you swinging by and checking out the beat of KC. As always, have a good one.